Okay, so this question comes from the review, question 3, which is based on weighted averages. So basically how you can calculate your grade for your course. So in this question, it says, consider in your math course that has 2 tests, 1 midterm and 1 final. Tests are each worth 15%, and the midterm is worth 30%, and the final is worth 40%. So the student gets 78% and 62% in the 2 tests, 82% in the midterm and 74% in the final. What is the average for this student? So remember, you're going to have the ability to, you will have the weighted formula to use on the test, which essentially is the sum of the weighted means divided by the sum of the weight. And for most times, the sum of the weight is equal to 1, but not always. So just keep that in mind when you're doing these questions. So the first thing that I always do is I take inventory. So what we have here is the first test, the student scored, test 1 is equal to that student scored 78%. Test 2, the student scored an 82%. Oh, sorry, not 72 or not 82%, but 62%. So maybe didn't study as hard for test 2 because that's dropped quite a lot. So the midterm was equal to 82%. So they definitely studied a lot harder for that, knowing, oh man, like that's worth a lot more. And then the final was 74%. So it dropped a little bit there. So what I'm going to do is, yes, these are all in percents, but that's not going to help us because everything is weighted differently. Like if we look at the question, we see that the tests are worth 15%, the midterm is worth 30, and then the final is worth 40. So we have to take that into account. So for the test that's worth 15%, we need to convert that into its decimal. So on a test, we wouldn't need to see 15 divided by 100. Hopefully you know it is 0.15. And that's what we're going to multiply that 78% by in order to calculate what 78% is actually worth based on it being weighted 15%. So if we calculate 78, multiply that by 0.15, we end up with 11.7. So essentially what that means to us is that if the student only did one test and got a 78% and just stopped going and forgot that there was an academic drop deadline, then if they got 0 on everything else, they would score 11.7% in the course. That's what that means. So we're going to do the same thing for test 2 because it is also worth 0.15. So we take the 62 and we multiply it by the 0.15. We get 9.3. The 82% for the midterm, we're going to multiply that by 0.3 because it's worth 30%. So 82 multiplied by 0.3 gives us 24.6. And then the final is worth 40%. So we're going to multiply this by 0.4. So 74 multiplied by 0.4 gives us 29.6. So that is what we have tabulated, those scores. And in a moment we're going to sum those. So I'm just going to move to the next page with the same information so I have more room to write. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add up these to give us a sum. So we're going to take the your 29.6, 24.6, 9.3, and 11.7 and add them up. And I end up with 75.2. Okay. Now, the one thing that we actually have to do, so that is the sum of the weighted means, the weighted averages. Okay, so we're going to take that and we're going to divide that by the sum of weight. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're now going to add up all of the decimals that we have, and hopefully it should equal 1. So we're going to take the 0.15 both times 0.3 for the midterm and 0.4 for the final, and we're going to add those together. So 0.15 plus 0.15 plus 0.3 plus 0.4 does in fact give us 1, and it should, because this course should just be out of 100%. So 1 divided by 1 times 100 gives you that 100%. So that is the sum of the weights. So we're going to take that 75.2 and we're going to divide it by 1, and that will give us the final average for this person in the course, which is 75.2%. So that is how we do average weighting. So if you're curious on to where your grades stand prior to your final exam, this is how you would go about doing that. So I hope this helps.